Hello and welcome to our podcast, Film Thinkers Podcast. I'm Lauryn McClenon.
And I'm Kyree Taloff.
And we are exploring the connections of Tsai Ming-liang's Rebels of the Neon God and Vive l'Amour.
This podcast was created for our English 103 class, Rhetorics of Asian Cinema at Chapman University. We've spent the semester looking into defining rhetoric through Asian cinema. After watching Rebels of the Neon God and Vive l'Amour and analyzing both films, we want to add to the discussion of Tsai Ming-liang and queer Asian cinema.
To introduce the films, Rebels of the Neon God is a Taiwanese coming-of-age drama from writer and director Tsai Ming-liang. The film captures four young adults following Shao Kang Sheng-li, a cram student who eventually drops out as he begins to stalk a young petty thief, Atzi Chen Xiaozhang, after he smashes the rearview mirror of the taxi Shao Kang's father drives. Meanwhile, Atzi and his friend Ah Ping, Zhen Changping, meet Atzi's soon-to-be girlfriend Ah Kui, Wang Yuan, where the three of them continue around the city getting involved in petty crimes and minor trouble.
Vive l'Amour is a 1994 Taiwanese new wave romance drama film by the same filmmaker. The film follows Mei Lin, young Kui Mei, a real estate agent, and Shou Kang Li Kangsheng, now a young salesman, and Arang Chen Chao Hung, a street vendor. As all three of them are squatting in one of Mei Lin's vacant apartments, Mei Lin and Arang start hooking up while a suicidal Shou Kang hides. Eventually, Arang and Shou Kang become friends, hiding from Mei Lin, and even while Arang and Mei Lin continue their relations.
For the historical background, in May 1949 to July 1987, Taiwan experienced what is referred to as the White Terror with the era of martial law. During that time of 38 years, the rights of free assembly and free speech were denied, and publication and almost all cultural imports were banned. Afterwards, in the 1990s, there became a rapid modernization of major urban cities with the effects of Western influence on the rise. The political and economic changes made youth culture reflect feelings of restlessness and lack of purpose, as Taipei especially had a new sense of gloom that pushed many young people to rebel against traditional culture and to adopt a sense of Western freedom. In both films, the main characters' carelessness and undirected attitudes reflect Taiwan's societal changes, especially as the urban landscape can be attributed to the detachment and isolation felt by the people of the city.
We will be talking about how Rebels of the Neon God and Vive l'Amour relate, but also how they apply to Tsai Ming-liang as a person while analyzing from the lens of altruism. We're interpreting that Vive l'Amour is a sequel in order to analyze Shou Kang as a queer character. We will be analyzing the themes of loneliness and how that connects to queer theory.
To look at how Vive l'Amour is a sequel to Rebels of the Neon God, we want to look at the character of Shou Kang. He is not only in both movies, but he goes by the same name and is played by the same actor.
In Rebels, he is known as the son of a taxi driver, which it's weird because what does that even mean? I mean, I guess that's the whole point of the film, but he's more than just that. And
there is also this theme of queer identity throughout the Rebels of the Neon God, especially with Shou Kang. The biggest example of this is how he's trying to get revenge on the guy who broke his dad's mirror, and there is sort of this like romantic tension between them. He has this sort of, it's almost viewed as like a crush, like Shou Kang has a crush on him.
But you want to know why that is? It's because this is the only form of outside connection Shou Kang has with anybody. Plenty of reviews or whatever, they say that Shou Kang's crush is Ah Kui, or his girl of his dreams or whatever. But you only really see them maybe interact a couple times, right? And it's just weird because
the movie poster is literally, like, one of the major movie posters is Shou Kang and Atzi, who's the guy who breaks the mirror, and it's like very like heavily implied throughout the film that it's he has a crush on him. Like,
yeah, but you think that, right? But we're looking at it in a specific lens, right? Mm-hmm. I found an article or a review, a blog post kind of, right? And it's a guy talking about this movie, obviously, and he talked about how he likes the film, but throughout the whole thing, right, it has nothing to do that there's queer identity in the film. And it's pretty much just like how Shou Kang has a complex of a neon god, and also that he's a stalker, which makes sense, but it says he's a neon god feeling a sudden authority to inflict on the rebels of his kingdom.
Wow. Cite your sources. What's that article from?
It was like a blog post by this guy. I think it's called Burning the Celluloid.
Oh.
And basically he said that, right? But it also shows the ambiguity of the film, right? Because you could come in with any sort of eyes, right? We went in analyzing because we knew it was going to be a queer film from the get-go, right? This guy didn't know anything about the film before, probably just it was an art film. So it's interesting to see different perspectives of the ones that we already have,
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting to bring in. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. And then when we're looking at Vive l'Amour, Shou Kang is a funeral salesman. And in this film, the big theme of this film is isolation. And there's a specific scene where Shou Kang's coworkers are playing games together, and he's in the corner with them and not interacting with them at all. He's isolating himself, and it's kind of like portrayed as a queer character, as a gay character. And we'll get into more on how the isolation aspect implies this queer theory, but that will come later. Because in Rebels of the Neon God, it wasn't as obvious of his queerness.
Yeah.
But in Vive l'Amour, it was like very more clear and like acted upon.
Yeah.
Like he's more accepting of his queerness.
And I feel like it's also like, I think when you're younger, you try to put that off, right? And you don't want that as your main identity, really, as opposed to when you're older. And maybe it's because it's the movie happens later on as well. It's like a time difference. Maybe the culture has been more accepted of that, and he could actually go out and be himself without someone, judging him for who he is.
Yeah, we literally see him trying to bond with Arang, yep. And it seems very genuine, and he even kisses him. So it's like, it's definitely more there. And this is like all how this is a sequel, because there's this connection throughout the plots. They both have this like urban isolation, and it's the same character, like literally name actor and actor.
But right. Shou Kang is the same character, right? But here's another thing. Atsu from Rebels of the Neon God is the same actor of Arang in Vive l'Amour, which it's interesting that I just randomly found that out. But both of the two movies, right? It's different characters, Atsu and Arang, but Shou Kang happens to have a crush on both of them, right? Which, I don't know, it's just interesting how Tsai Ming-liang made that happen. Yeah.
And I definitely think that is Tsai Ming-liang's, like, he definitely obviously did that on purpose.
Yeah, clearly.
Which kind of brings us into talking about, like, who is Tsai Ming-liang? He's still alive.
Yeah, he's not alive.
He's still alive. So who is he?
Who was he?
Who was he? So he's a filmmaker based in Taiwan.
He's Malay.
Yeah.
Don't forget to include that.
Yeah. And he's very celebrated as like the second new wave film director, and is often referred to as like the grandfather of slow cinema, which is like very true in both of these movies. And he's also just like he's also openly gay as a film director.
So yeah, that makes sense into the films or what he's doing in the films. And also here's another thing, right? Oh wait, let's bring up altruism first.
Yeah, let's define that.
Let's define
What
what
does
that
it mean?
is. Altruism is the theory that the director is the primary author of a film with their primary style or personal style, and vision shaping the entire production, which leads to our theory, right? That these movies were based on him when he was younger, right? Rebels of the Neon God being Shao Kahn being him, and him going through the experiences of, being a young gay man, and feeling this often or this sense of disconnection, maybe with the word isolation, urban isolation, and feeling lonely, because he didn't really have much. He didn't have any friends, really, from what we got from the film. Only connections were literally the connection that he made to, pretty much, I guess, stalk Anzi and get the revenge of,
Shao Kahn, not Tsai Ming-liang.
Oh.
We're talking about the character.
Well, yeah, no, but that's that. Whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Continue.
Yeah. So basically, I watched this video about. It was an interview of Tsai Ming-liang, and basically he said a lot of things that I took note of. I thought it was interesting. Obviously, I needed to get background for this podcast, but his creative process starts from his own life experiences, right? Which tie to, Tsai Ming-liang being Shao Kahn or whatever, the movies being from his own life experience. And he really wanted to make movies because, or he was interested. Why do we even watch movies? It's a form of entertainment, but is that all there is to it? Which, led to him making his own movies and having meaning behind them, even though there's an ambiguous meaning throughout, obviously from the review that I talked about earlier. Anybody could find any meaning of the film, but it could still be right because there's not an explicit meaning toward the film. And about that, he said, the more you experience life, the more you realize life is full of ambiguity. And I agree with that as well. He also talked about how in real life, I think this is a big point that we could talk about. In real life, no one shows their identity explicitly. And no one will immediately know your sexuality. And it's just to be implied, through action or whatever. But I want to dissect this a little bit more, right? Nobody knows your identity explicitly. So when we're watching Vive l'Amour, right, you see that only things that we see is the stuff that is in the film, obviously. But Vive l'Amour, the Shao Kahn scene when he's in the dress, right? You would have never known that he was gay.
Because you don't see he's doing this stuff alone.
Alone. Yeah, he's
alone.
Doing,
so if you ran into him, if you're in Taipei and you're run into him on the street, you're not gonna know anything about him. You're not gonna know that he attempted suicide. You're not gonna know.
Yeah, exactly. All these stuff is done in private. Yeah, and that ties exactly to the point that he was trying to make in the interview. And also, no one is immediately known, or nobody's going to immediately know your sexuality, right? Mm-hmm. It's only just based on action or however, and it's only to be implied especially through that other, I keep pulling from this guy, but the blog, the review, it was implied that there was no sexuality base of the film. He just watched it from the lens that he watched it, He just thought it was an art film, or however, And
right.
It's just interesting to see different people's perspectives on.
Yeah. And then with that though, the ideas of loneliness, he's existing as a queer person by himself. No one sees him as that because he's not living his life that way. And that sort of goes into this idea and of the themes of loneliness within the films. They have there's this emotional loneliness and disconnection, and it's living in with this urban living setting in the city of Taipei.
Yeah.
And like looking at the films and like the cinematic techniques of them and the cinematic aspects of them, they both have very little dialogue, and they like, which forces the audience to rely on the visuals to understand the messages. So you're sort of like, Simon Leung like wants us to use the silence and the mise en scène, which is the arrangement of scenery and environment, to like make the audience feel and understand the mindsets of the characters and like the overall theme and narrative of the film. And it's like using how people in modern day and urban life often still feel isolated, even though like you're surrounded by so many people, you're in this big city, and yet like so many people around you probably have similar feelings, similar lives, and similar emotions, but you never know because you're all just so isolated. You're all living these like mundane lives, like repeated routines. That's a big theme throughout both films.
Yeah.
And like, this is not even just a thing in these films. Like, it's a real life thing.
Yeah.
It's like
experiences.
But like, I mean, it's also like, it's kind of shown throughout, like even in Hollywood, that's kind of a big thing of like, or people will talk about like people becoming famous and still feeling very isolated, feeling very alone, and like people or
what was the dude that just passed away from One Direction? The guy that killed himself in the. It's not funny, but the hotel, you know.
Yes.
In Hollywood, yeah, these people they have all this money, all these resources, you know, but they're still, you know, not living their best lives, and they still feel isolated. And it's just, we see this throughout, a similar thing throughout the films, you know, especially Vive l'Amour. All of them, they go into the same house, but they're all at some point in the film, we see so many times that they're depressed or lonely or isolated.
And like looking at the historical context, especially for like Taipei at the time, of like all of that like terror in the world and like this rise of Western influence, it's definitely like pushing against like the traditional culture, but then living in this like era of like kind of depression really just like enhances that. And I think like relating it to us and relating to our generations of like how kind of like where we're coming from and how we're able to analyze this is because like it's kind of these like artwork kind of imitates life, and that's sort of what this film is doing. It's like portraying a real life thing, and it's not even something that's like people will look at this and think it's like, oh, you know, foreign film like from the 90s, like I have no relation to it.
But it speaks volumes up until this day as well.
Yeah, it's still really...
both of the films, like we just keep on seeing the message is going to continue on and on and on. And some people, when you watch it, you don't really realize that. But if you really analyze the film, you could see these underlying, I don't know, like underlying...
the like underlying like feelings of the time and like
themes too. Yeah, that was the word I was looking for.
Yeah, and so then that kind of also like ties into back to the queer theory that we were getting at. There's a specific concept that we wanted to talk about, which is queer temporality. And in the Oxford Research Dictionary, it describes queer temporality as how it pushes against heteronormativity's framing and disciplining of time, charting more queer ways to think about history, pace, relationships, notions of success, and the linear segmentation of past, present, and future. So basically what that means is, to define heteronormativity, it's this idea that being heterosexual and cisgender is like the normal. And the like, and everything else is like morally wrong or biologically incorrect. So what like queer temporality basically is like how it's like looking like kind of in society when we're looking at like life and life experiences, it's often focused on like a heteronormative sort of perspective, and it's sort of that idea.
We see that a lot. I feel like once I think there was like a queer film that came out, right? Call Me by Your Name. Was that was big or something?
Yeah.
I feel like that was the first time I ever heard of like
Really?
Yeah. Like
Call
that's
Me
the
by Your Name?
first time I ever heard of queer. What is it? Queer theory in film.
I guess so.
Something like that. Yeah.
Luca
I feel like
Guadalingo, the man you are.
yeah, but I feel like that was the first time that seemed normal in a film, not, well, I don't mean it like that, but like that.
Well, I just think that's funny because of the age gap in that movie.
Oh,
But,
I never seen it, but I heard of it. That's the first time that I actually heard of that being in a film, not to refer to it as that, but
No, I know what you mean, but that's low-key kind of crazy.
How is that crazy?
Not crazy, but that's the first. I love that that's the one. That's the first one.
Yeah, no. But I feel like that reinforces what heteronormativity is trying to do, right? And it's making it seem like it's different, but everything is morally right. That, like, if there's queer stuff in a movie and then there's also straight stuff, they're both normal. And neither should be looked at as wrong, you know?
The problem isn't that they're two men, it's the fact that he's 17.
I've never seen it, but...
And that's why I'm like, that's interesting that one's the one that we're going to as morally okay because he is 17 and
no pedophiles.
But I mean, okay, well, my first, I think, film focusing on queer relations, like major film, I think was probably Moonlight, maybe. I feel like there's some, and okay, well, I feel like there's probably one before it. I mean, I was also a weird middle schooler who was reading a lot. And
that's probably how you found
out. I remember watching Moonlight and being like, feel like this is like revolutionary. Which is a great movie. You should watch it.
Okay.
But that was definitely one of like, I mean, that one explores like being queer and like normalizing it.
But think about how long movies have been around, right? And how recently that's being normal.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yes. But that's sort of like back to the idea of like queer temporality of like, it's basically how when we're looking at society and life experiences, we have this like heterosexual sort of like lens on it. Yeah. And like movies like Call Me by Your Name or Moonlight even, it's sort of like challenging that of like looking at these life experiences through a queer lens and like seeing, that's kind of what queer temporality is. It's looking, it's like looking at how with the heteronormative lens, looking on life experiences, we sort of like, we'll have these markers that of childhood, adolescence, adulthood, marriage, reproduction, parenthood. Like, it's sort of like the things of like first crush, like from children, we sort of push these ideas of like being heterosexual. And there's actually an article, a queer theorist from Jack Halbert Sam, and it's the article, It's a Wild and Queer World, and his impact on queer theory, which mentions the concept of queer temporality. And there's actually a quote that it opposes chromonormativity, which is the heteronormative temporal notion that a good, happy, successful life is marked by a particular set of celebrated milestones. These markers usually include birth, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, marriage, reproduction, parenthood, anniversaries, retirement, and death. So basically, what that's saying, what Halbert Sams defines queer temporality as like the rejection of that narrative that life has to start with adolescence and then go to like early adulthood, marriage, reproduction, childbearing, and retirement. And he has this quote that says, "Queer time for me is the dark nightclub, the perverse way, turn away from a narrative coherence." And it's sort of like embracing queer failure. So queer failure. So looking at these movies, looking back at the movies and looking at Shou Kang, of sort of those ideas of like isolation and loneliness comes from the fact, like looking at him as a queer character, he feels these ways because he doesn't get to have that like the heteronormative life that is sort of opposed.
Yeah.
And like, especially in Taipei at the time, it wasn't very accepted to be queer. So he doesn't get to live like life, a very like celebrated life the way he would, more likely would if he was heterosexual.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like looking at him specifically, we see how he navigates like rebellion, loneliness, his personal identity, and the dissatisfaction along with the effects of urban environments and like class struggles with the westernization of Taipei. We see that a lot in Rebels of the Neon God. And then in Vive l'Amour, the first thing we see of him is him attempting suicide.
Yeah.
So it's like, even though he's like, in Vive l'Amour, he's definitely more able to express his queerness. He's still very deeply unhappy. And like, that's how like queer temporality and like living life queer kind of like can do. And it's not like the identity of being queer. It's like of course, like outside society, not
accepting you for who you are, even though you're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah. So that's sort of like the loneliness aspect really comes through, and especially like how it impacts him specifically.
Also, looking back at Tsai Ming-liang, he said also in that interview that his films, some of the details depicted in them have actually happened to him. So in that sense, the movies are like a diary for him. And I think that could connect possibly, or I at least believe that it connects to Vive l'Amour and Rebels of the Neon God being that Rebels, he was younger and tried to hide that identity of him. And then Viva, he was, more mature, or not mature, but like he's older. He grew to accept it, even though the what is it called? The external factors are still there, makes him want to, kill himself. Obviously, we've seen it in the film. He was trying to slit his wrist. But yeah, I think that really leads into the main point of Tsai Ming-liang and Shao Kahn, being the same, or being Shao Kahn being Tsai Ming-liang, and Tsai just putting that into the films. So, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so it's really clear, like, that, I mean, Tsai Ming-liang has made several films, but like these two specifically, we really feel like they just are so connected, and they're so really portray Tsai Ming-liang's like altruism so much that like they just have to be like Vive l'Amour has to be a sequel of Rebels of the Neon God, and it's just like
it has to portray something of him if it was the same character, same idea twice in a row. Must mean something.
It's almost like a part two, and it's like looking at Tsai Ming-liang's life, like him as a queer person I'm sure has felt all this like feelings. The queer temporality, and like has experienced that. So like making these films for him is a way to connect, and it's like as you get older, you are able to like look back and reflect more. So I'm sure it seems that like he could have made Rebels of the Neon God, like looking back to that time in his life. And then as he was able to continue to get older and reflect more, he was able to reflect on the next stage of that, which he was able to portray through Vive l'Amour.
And Rebels of the Neon God obviously came out first, right? So, that. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, yeah.
Say something good.
And that is a very great point, Kyree. Thank you for mentioning that. So, yeah, I mean, basically to, like, wrap it up, to, like, summarize our points of how, taking into the effect of the historical context of Taipei at the time, at the time of how Tsai Ming-liang grew up, and was going through his life experiences, it becomes really evident that he likely made Vive l'Amour as a sequel to Rebels of the Neon God, using Shao Kahn as sort of a portrayal of himself, using altruism, and Shao Kahn to be the character that he uses to represent himself. And as the character exists in both movies, it's very, and has sort of this, it seems to be the same character. It's just very clear that it's likely to be a sequel, and following, like, using the themes of queer temporality and is just really like what platforms these movies together. So yeah.
We've come to the end of our podcast. Let us know if you think Vive l'Amour and do you agree that these two are a sequel? And we believe that oh my god, damn it.
Yep. And so yeah, that's what we came to talk about. That's what the podcast.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Any last closing remarks we plug? Can I plug your Instagram? Or I don't know.
Oh.
No.
I'm fine.
No. Okay. Well, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
See you next time.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.